Howdy, howdy, howdy. Welcome to Office Hours FM episode number 108. I am your host, Carrie Dills, and today I have on a very special guest, Amy Northard. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Did I say your last name right?
Close. Northard.
Northard. Okay. See,
Yeah.
I've done worse with names.
Yeah, and that happens all the time. So.
Okay, well, I get called Dials, and I get called lots of things. So I'll try to have it right from now on out. For those of you who are tuning in live, you're in for a major treat. Amy, and actually for those of you who are listening after the fact, you're in for a treat too. You just don't have the opportunity to to ask questions while I'm live with Amy. But Amy is the first CPA, Certified Public Accountant, that we've ever had on the show. And I know that a lot of us, a lot of you guys who tune into the show, myself included, are small business owners and navigating the waters of taxes, keeping records, all that stuff is crazy. So we're here today to let Amy just rain down some mass knowledge and wisdom and tips for you guys. Before we get started, I would like to thank our sponsor of today's show, that is SiteLock. SiteLock is a global leader in website security solutions and currently protects over 1 million WordPress sites. They are sponsoring several WordCamps coming up. They'll be at WordCamp Europe tomorrow. So if you're in Vienna, be sure to stop by and say hello to them. And they'll be out at WordCamp Orange County in July. And WordCamp Boston too. They're going to be all over the place. Huge supporters of the WordPress community, and thank them for supporting this show. You can learn more about them at sitelock.com/office hours. All right. And without further ado, let's dig in. Oh, wait, I forgot to say, if you're watching live, hop on Twitter and ask questions with hashtag OfficeFM. Or if you're watching over on Google/YouTube, you can use the Q&A app to get your questions in over there. So, hello, Amy.
Hi.
Again, let's try this. This is my guest, Amy Northard.
Hello.
Did I get it right that time? Perfect. All right. So for folks that haven't met you, and I actually just met you here a few minutes ago, would you introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what you do, and maybe how you got into accounting?
Sure. So, like you said, my name's Amy Northard, and I got into accounting way back in high school. I was just telling a friend yesterday that I had the choice between jewelry electives for high school and accounting electives, and thank you to my dad, he made me take the accounting electives, even though I would have much preferred to take a jewelry class, because I do have that creative interest. I'm not necessarily good at any one thing, but I love to try out new things. So that's kind of where it got started. I was good at it. I liked putting things into place and filling out forms, and so I just decided to do it in college. There wasn't anything else calling me, so I got through accounting in college. I did an internship at a tax firm, and I really liked more forms to fill out and organizing all the information. It was just really interesting to me because up until that internship, I'd never even done my own taxes. So I really loved that. Tax season, the days flew by, and I was never really sitting there ready to go home. It always seemed like the days weren't long enough. So that was when I kind of figured out that I think this is a good fit for me. And after college, I went back to that CPA firm and started as a tax accountant there. I started studying for my CPA exam, so I was doing that during lunch breaks and after work and on the weekends, and then finally got that CPA license. And it was about that time where I was sitting there and I was thinking, I'd been through several tax seasons, and I just didn't want to be in the cubicle anymore. So I was started to daydream, and I tell people I think I had my quarter life crisis back then, because I was like, I love what I'm doing, but I just don't necessarily love the clients I'm working with and the environment that I'm in. So that's when I went full time. I actually left that business. I went into a part-time job doing nothing accounting related. My dad thought I was insane. And then while I had the part-time job, I was able to build up my clients and then go full-time with it last 2 Decembers ago. And so that's when I was full-time, able to work with all the clients who are doing design work, photographers, web developers, all kinds of different creative fields. And like I mentioned, I'm not great at any one thing, but I love watching my clients pick something and really excel in it. And I'm like cheering them on behind the scenes, because I think that's really awesome and a gift that I don't have, but I love watching.
That's awesome. So how did you land on creatives as the group of people that you wanted to serve?
I think it just came from that background of always loving to do more creative things. Like at one time I had a blog that I was taking pictures of meals that I was making, and so I love blogging, and I tried my hand at knitting and all the different crafts that you can imagine. And so I've just always kind of been more creatively inclined and gravitated towards those types of businesses. And I love watching them start off as hobbies and then growing into full-time jobs.
Well, I think you've just described a lot of people that probably tune into the show can identify with that journey of your own journey of being in the cubicle, dreaming of getting out and working for yourself and taking on a load of clients. Awesome. Well, I've got some questions. There are a couple people that could not tune in live today, but dropped off some questions for me, or questions for you, I should say. So Chrissie asks, she says, I'm doing payroll for myself using a third-party provider. It drafts my account in 2 chunks, one for net pay and one for all the taxes. I categorize the net pay in my accounting software under the expenses category, salary, wages, but I'm not sure what to do with the taxes. I have several categories in my accounting software for tax liability, but I'm not sure if that's correct.
So in that case, when they're taking the taxes out as a chunk and then the third party is paying those in for you, you can just expense it. So when you see something called a liability, think of it like a credit card. You may have the product, but you still owe it to someone else. So you still owe money. When someone's taking the money, like this third-party accounting or payroll company, you'll just skip the transaction of putting it in there that you still owe it, because they've already taken it out. So anyways, with all that to be said, you can just expense it and put it as like a category called payroll tax expense. And then it'll show up on that report that shows your income and expenses.
Very cool. Well, we just went straight for I guess the middle end of the pool, but let me back up a little bit and just ask, because I'm sure you've seen people in all kinds of situations tax-wise. Generally speaking, regardless of whether you're an LLC or a sole proprietor or whatever your business structure is, what advice would you give to a freelancer or small business owner around like bank accounts, like how many to have, what kinds to have, and just sort of the general broad picture of bookkeeping strategies?
Sure. So what I always start off asking people is, do you have a separate bank account for your business? Because, you know, when you start off small, it seems like something that's not very necessary. It's not a big deal for the payments to get directly put into your personal account, and that just means one less step for you to have to transfer it in there. But when it comes to bookkeeping, when you have those transactions in the separate business checking account, then it just works easier if you're using a bookkeeping software. because you don't have to sift through all of your personal purchases to find a business purchase. And then you know if everything's in one place that you're not forgetting something. So I always at least recommend setting up a separate business checking account. And if you're a sole proprietor, you can just open up another personal account and just make sure that you're putting everything into that checking. If you are anything other than a sole proprietor, then I would recommend talking to your bank about setting up the business checking account. Sometimes they'll have minimums on how much money they want you to keep in there without charging you a fee, but you can always try to negotiate, especially if you have your personal checking there as well, and just see if they can work with you on those fees.
Good advice. I had a follow-up question, and then I read a question on Twitter, and it fell out of my head. So I'll circle back around to it whenever it comes back. Oh no, I know what it was. Do you have a preferred accounting tool, both in terms of so you have to keep up with your own books, and then also you're on the accounting end of you get other people's books. Is any particular software easier to work with than others, like QuickBooks versus FreshBooks or 17 Hats, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so personally, I use QuickBooks Online. The only downside to that program really is that it helps if you have some accounting knowledge to use it. Otherwise, you could think you're doing everything correctly, but behind the scenes, the numbers aren't rolling into your reports correctly. So QuickBooks Online is great if you have some knowledge or time to learn about how to use the program correctly. Another one that I like is Wave apps, and they are for a little bit less complex businesses, so I really like them a lot for freelancers who maybe you work with clients and have big deposits instead of having a bunch of little smaller transactions. And theirs is a little bit less of a learning curve, but still with any program, definitely take some time to learn the correct way to use it. And then, you know, I always started out recommending just Excel to people because you've got enough going on with your business. If you can't afford to hire a bookkeeper to do it all for you and you need to use a program that you're going to keep up with on a regular basis, sometimes Excel is the best option because it's not overwhelming. You can change up the way that you're organizing your information based on your needs, and you can get the reports that you need just by organizing the spreadsheets correctly. So don't feel like you need to rush to a program. If Excel is going to be what you can go to on a monthly basis and don't put it off, then do Excel.
Good advice. Actually, I use a little tool called Todoist to keep my to-do items in check, and I have a recurring task every Friday morning that pings me to go reconcile all transactions for the week. So that way, because otherwise I found even if I did it once a month, I'd be like, no, what was that charge? What was that for? And so my memory's so terrible. I found that if I do it once a week, I at least have a better chance of remembering. Let's see. Relevant to that, Paul asks, is there a good resource to learn about QuickBooks online? Because boy, it is a beast.
Yes, it definitely can be. I know that lynda.com has tutorials there. There's also a ton of information on YouTube, so if you're trying to figure out a specific thing, before you go and pay for something, try just looking up in YouTube like how to record a payment in QuickBooks Online, and something as simple as that search term will probably generate quite a few videos that will walk you through exactly what to do in the program.
Cool. Good tip there. Stephanie asked a great question. She says, are you able to work with clients in all states, or do you specialize in certain states? Because I know that can, I'm sure, I don't even know how you keep up with all that.
Yeah. Because of the CPA license, there's a law or ruling that is called CPA Mobility. And basically what it says is, as long as your state, which is mine is Indiana, as long as their requirements match up similarly to our state, we're going to let you practice in our state. And that's been the case in every state that I've had inquiries for. They've accepted the Indiana license. And something that not a lot of people know is that the test that all CPAs take is the same for anyone in the US. So really the only differences are education requirements. That's the biggest thing. So I do work with people all over the US. It does sometimes get challenging, like when we run into sales tax laws and that kind of thing. So there's a little bit more research involved for me since I work with people all over. But I love it because it broadens the people that I can work with and the different talents that contact me.
Cool. Yeah, I can't even figure out the state of Texas tax laws, and I've lived here all my life. So that's kind of cool. You can work across the borders there. And maybe this is a dumb or obvious question, but entertaining international clients, or does your license only enable you to operate in the U.S.?
Good question. So I don't work with international clients, and I rarely work with people that are U.S. Based living in another country, just because there are a lot of different rules. So I usually refer those people to accountants that specialize in more nomadic business types. Definitely if they're citizens of other countries filing in those other countries, I don't touch those at all. It's enough to know the 50 states here, and that there's no way that I could add in other countries.
Paul says, do I sound funny to you? Or
to me?
Yeah.
You were a little fuzzy, but it sounds fine now.
Okay. Paul said I sounded like Darth Vader. I hope it's all right now. I'll do some switching around here in a sec. Jackie asked, any advice on estimating taxes when your income varies quarterly? So we're talking about quarterly taxes, and how do you avoid underpaying?
That's a really good question. So what most accountants are familiar with, and what you'll run into a lot, is having accountants prepare your quarterly tax payments based on the previous year. So they'll basically say, how much tax did you owe last year? Let's divide it by 4, and then make sure that you're paying in those 4 payments this year. But as we all know, with our income varying so much, that can lead to overpaying quite a bit or underpaying quite a bit. So what I usually recommend for people to do is save about 30%. And if you live in a state without income tax, you could probably go down to 25%. And then if you live in a state like California with high income taxes, you may have to bump it up to 35%. But right around saving 30% of your profit, which is income left after expenses, should give you enough money to pay in each quarter and cover the tax that's due. And by looking, like, let's say we look at the first quarter, and you make $1,000 for the first quarter. If you save $300 for that quarter, you can either pay it in at that time, or you can hang on to it until you file your taxes. But that's when you run into having those underpayment penalties. So I always recommend people pay it in, but if you need to hang on to it for cash flow issues, put it in a separate savings account so that you don't think about it as money that you can spend, because that's when people run into spending all their money like it's available to them, and then you get to the end of the year and you're like, I don't have any cash available to make these payments, and it can get stressful.
I may have done that a long time
I think everyone does that at least twice.
Is there a threshold where it's actually mandatory to submit quarterly payments?
So the thing with quarterly payments is if you miss one, even if you're making $200,000 a year, you will never get a notice from the IRS saying, where's your quarterly payment? But if you owe more than $1,000 on your tax return when you file, then that's when they start to implement underpayment penalties and interest. So that $1,000 mark is the threshold.
Okay, good to know. Pay your quarterlies, people. Ooh, good controversial question. Or maybe you don't think it's controversial question, but should freelancers be collecting sales tax? And I guess that really depends on what exactly it is that freelancer is doing.
Yeah, and it depends on what state they're in. So I know that in Texas, they do charge if you provide like digital files, and I think web design even qualifies. So they require that you collect sales tax from your clients. But in other states that don't have sales tax on purely services, then you wouldn't need to. So the best thing that I would recommend before you know, if you've been in business for a while, just stop now and check with your state. You might be on hold for a little bit, but it's very easy, and by a little bit, probably like a half hour or an hour, but it's very easy to give them a call, describe what you're doing, and then they can say yes or no. And then it takes that stress off of you of whether or not you should be doing it.
I wish I'd have known you when I was first starting doing all this. Of course, you might have still been in your CPA school. I don't know, but
very possible.
I made the mistake of collecting sales tax because I thought I was a service provider, freelancer, web service provider. I collected sales tax from my client, but I was subcontracting for another agency that was, of course, taxing their client. So it ended up being like a double taxation situation. And my client, or the people I was subbing for, made me aware of that. And I ended up having to go pay them back all the sales tax I had collected from them. But oh yeah, it just kind of made me, it's like, dang it, I just want to do the right thing, but you don't even know it's hard to know what the right thing is.
Yeah, and they don't make it very black and white on their website either. So it's confusing.
Oh, that's why we need you, Amy. We need a world full of Amy's to help us with this. Question from Paul. He says, for mileage, I've just started using TripLog, which syncs with QuickBooks Online. Is that a good, would you recommend that, or anything else in terms of keeping track of miles?
Yeah, I think it's great that you've started using the app. For those that haven't used an app like that before, another one would be Mile IQ. And basically it's kind of like your trip comes up. So when the phone senses you're moving past 5 miles an hour, it'll come up, and then you can swipe right or you can swipe left, depending on whether it's a personal trip or a business trip. And then kind of like what you're doing with your expenses, I would say once a week or once a month, go back, and for all those business trips, write down the client that you were meeting with or the purpose of the trip, even if it's just post office or the client's name, just something that reminds you of what the business reason for that trip is. And then it's really great that it's synced to QuickBooks, because that means you don't have to do a general journal entry at the end of the year to record that deduction. But if you don't sync it to your accounting program, just keep in mind that the deduction is 54 cents per mile this year. Last year it was 57.5 cents. So it went down a little bit, but it's still a really good deduction, especially if you drive fairly often, meeting with clients, or if you have to drop something off at the post office. and it can add up to a decent deduction for you.
Good deal. I like the swiping part.
Yeah.
And I don't get to use that dating app anymore. I'm kind of beyond that. But so now I can swipe for miles. Awesome. Let's see, another one from Paul. He says, so we're talking about traveling. I've been told that it's usually better to take the allowed daily per diem than to track exact amounts for food expenses.
It depends on the rate for the city and how much you're spending. I haven't done a study of the differences, and most of my clients end up just tracking their meals and entertainment throughout the year instead of doing the per diem. But there's a website, if you just Google US per diem rates, that should come up, and you can look and see where you're going to be traveling at and what the per diem rate is for that area. And then it might make sense to do that instead of having to track all your tips and your cab rides and all of that stuff.
Does that go under, like, what line item does that fall under tax-wise?
So you would want to keep it separate as far as the food goes, and then the actual travel. So things like taxis and hotels and flights would just go under a general travel expense, and then all of your meals and entertainment expenses would just be called meals and entertainment, and those just need to be separate because the IRS only allows you to take 50% of that as an expense.
Those bastards. I ate the whole hamburger. Okay, good stuff. You're truly a fount of knowledge. Not that I thought any less, especially since one Lindsay Riel of Pretty Darn Cute recommended you. I'm so glad she did. So back onto gas mileage, Chrissie asked, can I reimburse myself for the mileage, or is it just a deduction that you take on your taxes?
You'll just want to do the deduction on your taxes. So if you're a sole proprietor or LLC, you can reimburse yourself because you are taxed on the profit and not how much you actually pay yourself out of the business. So kind of to counteract what I said, go ahead and reimburse yourself if you want to out of your business, or just include it as your payment to yourself. The deduction will stay the same. So if you reimburse yourself at $1 per mile, you still only get that 54-cent deduction per mile.
Interesting. Interesting. And is so with the car, you can take either like your actual mileage if you're tracking miles, or depreciation. Is that the other option?
So the two options with cars are the mileage deduction or a percentage of your actual expenses. So that could include the depreciation, gas, tolls, license, basically anything related to you having to drive your car. But the downside to that is that you still have to record all of your miles, because the way that you figure out how much you've used your car for business purposes is to say, I drove 5,000 miles for business, and then overall I drove 10,000 miles this year, so I can deduct 50% of my auto expenses. So it's just more work, and you might not necessarily have a bigger deduction doing it that way.
Good to know. Let's see. Lots of good questions. So let's talk about shared expenses. You work in a home office. I know myself, a lot of folks tuning in also work in a home office. So what about things like my internet service that I do use for personal, but clearly for business? My office space is clearly, my mortgage allows me to be in this part of my house. How do you handle that when it's not clear cut?
Yeah, so things like your internet in your home office, they are going to be deducted on a home office worksheet on your taxes. And so kind of the way the worksheet works is if your home office is 100 square feet and your entire home is 1,000 square feet, you'll get to deduct 10% of your home expenses. So those are internet. If you have a home phone, which I don't, like most people don't have that line anymore, but you get to deduct that. Insurance, homeowners insurance. Same goes for renters. So you wouldn't be deducting any mortgage interest on this form, but you would be able to deduct a portion of your rent that you pay every month, as well as utilities and all of that stuff. So that's kind of how you deduct those shared expenses. When it comes to things like a cell phone, and it's not necessarily considered a home office expense, that's where things get a little bit more tricky, because technically what you would want to do is you'd want to look at your bank's or your phone statements for like the past 3 months and tally up how many calls were for business versus how many were for personal, and that would give you a good percentage to use to apply to your phone bill. It's kind of impossible to do that with your data plan, and so a lot of people use the reasoning that I have my data plan for my business. If I didn't have a business, I wouldn't need a data plan necessarily. So they end up deducting that chunk of their phone bill completely and then splitting up the rest of it by the percentage.
Here's one for you. What are, or do you know of, what are some red flags that when the IRS sees that, they're thinking this has got audit written all over it? Or do audits even like how frequently do audits happen? I mean, this is constant fear, like, oh my gosh, my records have to be perfect in case I get audited. I can just hand the full shoebox of receipts and da-da-da-da. What's your thoughts on that?
So the common misconception is just that having a home office is a red flag. And I think maybe that was the case like back in the 80s, but there's so many more people working from home now thanks to the internet, and it's so much more common that can't be a red flag anymore because they would be after so many people. So now I think a couple of red flags that I see, one would be if you say, I use 50% of my home for my business. When you have that business percentage higher than what would be reasonable, that's definitely a red flag, because you can't say, I work from my couch, so I'm going to deduct my living room. You know, things like that. So that kind of reasoning, don't go that way. If it seems kind of ridiculous, don't try it. The other thing is that I've had a lot of times tax notices are auto-generated. And the reason those happen is if you put on your tax return that you paid in estimated taxes, but let's say you only paid in 3 sets of them and you thought you paid in the 4th one, but you didn't, and you put all 4 on your tax return, the IRS immediately is going to say, what you reported on your tax return does not match with what we received. We're going to auto-generate this notice, and it will freak people out just like if they were getting audited. And they're scary to get in your mailbox, but just take a breath and just kind of like try to make sense of what they're telling you. Double check the facts on your end and then respond. Don't automatically pay what they're asking you to pay. Look into it a little bit before you send a check in with it.
All right. Breathe. Always good advice. Let's see. Stephanie has a question. She says, my husband and I each have a sole proprietorship. Can we consolidate them into one LLC and still do business as separate DBAs?
Yeah,
that's a mouthful.
I mean, I think you would want to talk with your personal accountant to make the actual determination on it. I don't think that it would hurt. I mean, tax-wise, things are going to end up flowing the same way. You're going to have to do a partnership instead of doing the 2 Schedule Cs. And then essentially what the partnership return does is it splits your income. And then flows through to your personal tax return, and then you're taxed there. So the taxes should end up roughly the same, if not exactly the same. And it sounds like a lot more work to set up the LLC and then both the DBA. So I would run it by your personal accountant first, and it's not a bad thing, but I don't know that it would consolidate or help with anything.
Okay. Following up on that, if you're freelancing, say as a sole proprietor, at what point do you need to incorporate? And for just individuals, no partnerships, what type of corporation is the best?
So it's, as soon as you start collecting payments from people, it's always a good idea to start thinking about becoming an LLC. In most states, the form is fairly easy to fill out yourself, and it gives you that protection so that if you messed up or you got sued, that once you have that LLC protection, your clients can't come after like your home or your car. They can only come after what's available within your business. The other thing that it provides you, and you could even really just do this with a tax ID number, but if you're operating as a sole proprietor, you have to give your social security number out when people want to issue you a 1099 form. So it can never hurt to get a federal tax ID number, so that at least you're not sending out your social security number to everyone. And when you're thinking about that next step of becoming an LLC, then check with your state, see what their annual fees are. In some states, it's only $50 one time to get the LLC. But in California, it's $800 a year. And that yearly payment is not something that most people expect or are prepared for. And they just sign up for the LLC because they think that they should. And it's not a bad thing, but just be prepared for the expenses that are associated with it.
Man, everything's more expensive in California.
Yeah.
They're even proud of their LLCs. Woo!
So proud.
For those of you who are maybe tuning in late, welcome to the show. I am chatting with Amy Northard, who is a CPA based in Indiana, and we're talking all kinds of good questions about freelancing and small business and taxes and bookkeeping. So get your questions in on Twitter with hashtag OfficeFM or on Google using the Q&A app. Let's see. Another one we got in Pennsylvania. My attorney said that Pennsylvania law protects sole proprietor as well as an LLC does. Does that sound right to you?
I haven't looked into the Pennsylvania laws that do protect it. I wouldn't go against what your lawyer is telling you, and it's very possible that they do have that same protection. I don't know, though, if the protection goes beyond state limits, so that might be a question that you ask, because if you're working with people outside of Pennsylvania, do those laws protect you in those circumstances?
So I'm going to break out of the asking you CPA-ish questions for a second and switch gears to just you running your own business. So your business probably, I mean, I'm guessing, tax preparation is the majority of what you do, but I imagine that you also get just the random phone calls or emails of, hey, what about this? Or, hey, I'm buying a car, or all these things that have tax implications, and people need a little consulting from you. Do you, is that time you're just giving away, or do you somehow have a retainer where people can call you up and ask all the questions they need, or how do you handle that?
So what I start off doing with anybody that contacts me, I do a free 15-minute consultation. So during those, I kind of go over what their business needs are, talk about what services I provide that would be a benefit to them, and then we have some time to talk about things like how do I pay myself as a business owner, or things that aren't going to require a whole bunch of research on my end, and we can kind of round out those 15 minutes with questions like that. Things that are a little bit more complicated, like sales tax issues, that kind of stuff, I just do it on an hourly basis. So we set up a call. They'll send me, like a lot of times business owners will have quite a few questions that they want to go over. They'll send that list to me. I'll do any research necessary because, you know, working with all the different states, I need a little bit of time and I don't know everything off the top of my head for these states. So then we'll hop on the phone and talk through everything. And then if they think of other questions, we'll cover those. But those one-off consulting calls are kind of what I like to do because a lot of the smaller business owners don't have enough issues to be paying a monthly fee for me right now. It might be something I do later on, but usually it's a one-off thing.
And do people know, like, if you, let's say I just drop an email in your inbox tomorrow and it's got 10 questions on it, are you going to email me back and say, sounds like we should schedule a consulting call?
Yes.
You can pay me here.
Yeah.
Let's see, lots of discussion on Twitter here, still going back to the how your business is filed. Stephanie says, I've read that an LLC doesn't actually protect you personally from lawsuits and that it's your insurance that does. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not the only line of defense. It's the first step. So, and I'm not a lawyer and I generally don't speak to liability issues, and that's more of your lawyer's role in your business. So I would touch base with them, but yes, insurance is always very smart to have. You'll want to talk to them about contracts as well as another way to cover yourself. So there's a lot of different layers, and the LLC is just one layer of protection.
Gotcha. And regarding insurance, do you recommend business insurance versus just whatever personal home insurance or whatever you have?
I would definitely look into liability insurance, especially, I mean, really in most businesses, you have the opportunity or you have the chance of not doing something correctly or just having someone get mad at you and then sue you for whatever they're angry about. So I personally have liability insurance. I think it's not super expensive, and it just kind of gives me some peace of mind that if someone does get angry at me and they want to sue me, I'm capped at this amount of money that I will be out, and I won't lose my whole business to someone getting angry at me. So.
And is that typically through just who, you know, the same kind of companies that provide your normal auto or home insurance?
Yeah, well, I think that there are companies that specialize in small business insurance. Hiscox is one of them that I've heard a lot of small business owners are using. But I just reached out to my insurance agent and told them what I wanted, and they shopped around for me and then got me hooked up with the business insurance through that. So they manage my homeowner's insurance, car insurance, and this might be through a different company, but I can still contact that agent to help me with it.
Okie dokie. This is completely off topic. It's just the nerd in me appreciating your website, which, by the way, will you share your URL?
Sure. It's amynorthardcpa.com, and Northard is spelled Northard.
Perfect. So if you're sitting in front of your computer, go over there and look at it. You have a little, I don't know if you call it a slider, but a little self-select tool where people can, you're giving them the cost right up front. And you know, you mentioned earlier that your husband's a web developer, so I'm sure he feels some of that pain of when you're doing custom work, the price is different every time because it just depends on what you happen to be doing for a project. But even though the work is technically different every time, or the details are different every time, what you're doing is the same, and you are able to give people that price. I don't know. I just loved that little select because you can see what the added value is. Okay, you need I can't remember what it was now, like $10.99 sent to contractors, how many do you need? Because that each one adds a little something else.
Yeah, I like
so you're
to have the price out there, because I think with a lot of accountants and, you know, even like the lawyers and those kinds of businesses, you go into it and you're like, I'm going to get a huge tax bill. Or a huge bill for working with this person. I don't even want to know what it is, but secretly you want to know, like, how bad is it going to be, or how not bad is it going to be? And it might be cheaper than what you were nervous about. So at least you're armed with that information. And I never like to surprise people with that. So that's one reason I put those prices on there. And yes, my husband is my handy dandy nerd in the house and made that slider for me. And I thought it was really cool. So I was excited that he got that on there this year.
I have to say though, he's not the only nerd in your house, because you admitted earlier on that you like filling out forms.
Oh yeah, I guess there's two of us.
there's two of you. Just nerdy ways. So we've talked a lot about taxes and bookkeeping as it relates to the U.S., which is clearly your purview. And you mentioned that you know it's how you can't know all the ins and outs of international tax law and whatnot. But any general accounting principles, other than you mentioned earlier, you know, like having a separate business banking account, tracking your expenses, any other just good principles that regardless of where you're located in the world, these are things you should be doing?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that I see that causes stress for business owners is waiting until it's time to file your taxes to add up all of your income and expenses. So like you mentioned, you go in once a week to categorize things, whether you're going in once a week or once a month or once a quarter at the minimum. Set a date for yourself, put it on there kind of like a client meeting, get used to it. You know, you get used to going to the gym if you go enough times, just get used to it, make it a part of your daily or your weekly routine and do it. And the more you do it, the easier it will feel. And then when you get to tax time, you will be so amazed, because you'll just go into whatever you're doing your bookkeeping in, pull a report, either do it in H&R Block or hand it over to your accountant. And it is so much easier than having to spend like a whole weekend gathering up all your stuff, trying to give it all categories, and trying to remember what payments were for.
Solid. Stephanie just said that you're probably going to be getting a lot of new clients or inquiries, at least after this episode. I hope so. We got about 10 minutes left here. So if you got questions for Amy, you best get them in, or I'm just going to be greedy and ask all of my questions. Is there anything, like when people have turned over their books to you to prep their taxes or whatnot, is there anything that has just made you cringe, and then you're like, please don't ever do that again, dear client?
I think that probably the funniest one was when someone wanted to see if they could deduct their new pool. So I looked into it. I was like, well, maybe there's some like loophole that we can figure out that you can deduct part of your new pool. And turns out there is, if you can get your doctor to basically support that for a medical reason you needed to get a pool. The chances of getting your doctor to actually like want to back you up if you were ever audited on that, good luck with that. So that was like the craziest thing. And I was like, I hope no one else comes and asks me for something that ridiculous. But that's a thing. And then that's probably the weirdest thing. The other thing that I think surprises people the most is that you can't deduct clothing. So it's probably not as big of a deal for people that work on the internet primarily, but I know that like when I work with photographers or wedding planners, they want to deduct their comfy shoes or their outfit that they only wear for weddings. And so telling people no to that is like, it's like punching them in the gut, I feel like sometimes, because they're like so sure that they can deduct that. because they only use it for business, and then I have to tell them the bad news. So I think that's probably one that surprises people the most.
But Amy, I don't ever use these yoga pants for yoga. They're for my business wardrobe only.
I think most of us would have a yoga pants expense line if we could.
We've actually, some friends and I just renamed them to web design pants.
Nice.
So you could have your accounting pants.
Yeah, I have them on right
now. And Stephanie says you cannot deduct your web dev pants. That is correct. I missed a question earlier when we were on the topic of LLCs. LLC SCorp versus CCorp. Is there thoughts there on is one more advantageous than the other in terms of tax benefit?
So for most small businesses, the S corporation is more advantageous over a C corporation because the way it works is with a C corporation, that corporation itself pays tax on the money that it earns. And then you as the business owner, when you get paid dividends from the business, you pay tax on those dividends. So it's essentially taxing that income twice, and that's in most cases not beneficial to you. So there's sometimes, like if you get large enough, there's a reason why businesses are corporations, but that's usually beneficial when you're past a certain limit. For all of the businesses that I work with, S corporations are more beneficial. And with those, you don't have to pay self-employment tax on the income that you pay yourself above and beyond the salary that you take from the business. So you have to take a reasonable salary. You can't just say, I'm going to pay myself $10,000 and then save money on the rest of it. You have to do a little bit of research and see what actually you could prove to the IRS would be reasonable. But those are kind of the differences between the two.
Thank you for explaining that. Is there a threshold of, and I don't know if it would be total profits or total receipts or total profits, but is there a threshold at which, as the owner, you have to take salary or versus doing owner draw or dividends?
There's not necessarily a threshold. If your business isn't making a profit, then you're not going to be required to pay yourself out of nothing. But if your business is making $1,000, you need to pay yourself $1,000 as a salary before you start taking draws. And so it's beneficial if you don't become an S corporation until you can pay yourself a decent salary and still have money left over to get that tax benefit. Because if you start out, jump right into an S corporation, you have the extra expense of the tax return that you have to file, and you have the extra expense of a payroll company that you have to work with, and it's just not necessary until you're making a little bit over what a good, decent salary would be for yourself.
Gotcha. I'll just say, and I only just met Amy. I clearly am an Amy fan already, but even if I didn't know Amy, I would say if you're not using a CPA, use one. It is by far the best money or the least money for the biggest return, just to make me feel good about that my ducks are in a row when I send them off to the big scary IRS. Let's see. Okay, so as someone, again, who has started their own business, any advice or words of wisdom, doesn't have to be in the accounting realm, but it could be, to someone who is just starting out on that journey?
I think it's a good idea to try and find someone that maybe is a little bit ahead of you, not necessarily like, it doesn't have to be the rock star in your genre of work, but just find someone maybe a little bit ahead of you that has gone through things before you, that can kind of mentor you and give you some advice. And it just helps whether you're doing that by purchasing a course and learning it that way, learning that person's information, or you just introduce yourself and make a connection with people. By having those connections and reaching out to people has been so invaluable to me, and helped me to grow my business in a really good way, instead of kind of taking a bunch of different paths, and it could be totally something different if I hadn't done that. And it's also just nice to talk to people sometimes. You know, you're working by yourself all the time, and just to have someone to go to with questions is really nice.
That is sound wisdom. So what's next for you? Like, does the career path of a CPA, will you do you further niche down your services, or do you go broader, or do you move into some other area of accounting, or maybe you start your crochet business?
Yeah, I think the next big step for me, because my clients seem to double every year, is I still like to work with the broad variety of creative business owners, but I can't do all the work myself anymore. So I have started to kind of lay the framework for hiring bookkeepers to help me do that work. I still plan to do the initial setup and consultation, and then once that's done, have the bookkeeper kind of take control of the monthly data entry and that kind of thing. Same thing goes with the tax preparation. I have already hired a part-time person to help with the data entry, and then I do the review portion of it and am the client contact there. But just growing my team is the next step, and it's super scary because I feel like I'm handing my children off to other people and entrusting them with all of this information. So that's kind of what this summer is going to be spent, is looking for those people that I can trust. I know they have enough knowledge to do the work correctly, and can add them to my team.
Awesome. Well, wishing you much success in growing your team. Before we jump off here, I do want to thank today's show sponsor again, SiteLock, who is your one-stop shop for all your security needs for a WordPress site. You can check them out at sitelock.com/office hours. And if you have not already subscribed to the Office Hours mailing list, you could do that today and be the recipient of the Office Hours FM ebook, which is freaking beautiful and awesome. Go to officehours.fm/ebook, and you can get that download for nothing. And with that, let's see, Amy, you mentioned your website earlier, amynorthard.com. Where else can people find you online to say hello?
Yeah, so the website, don't forget to add the CPA, amynorthardcpa.com.
Oh, thank you.
And then basically on any channel, I am at Amy Northard CPA. So I'm mostly active on Instagram. I love that as my creative outlet. I'm available on Twitter, and also post on Facebook too.
Awesome. Well, may many good things come your way, and may the audits stay at bay. That is my CPA poetry for today. Wow, that was terrible. Sorry. All right, folks. Well, appreciate you tuning in to listen today. Amy, so thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you guys next week. Bye.